Okay, it's 2 p.m. The inquiry is resumed. I've gone through my questions. We have answered some, but some haven't been answered. So if we can just try and focus on on answering what I'm asking, than bouncing, I think we might get through it a little bit quicker potentially. And it might be that you picked up on some points when I do ask a question, and you might just say refer to my earlier answer. So, there's one point I just want to pick up, Mr. Mann, in 2.03 and 2.04 of your proof. You talk about a potential misinterpretation on noise contour plots in the environmental statement. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, the buildings have just been put on top of the baseline conditions, which haven't changed because they're baseline.
Yes.
So the road shows red because that's what it's like right now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That wouldn't change because there wouldn't be any buildings on the road, so there wouldn't be any change to the road baseline. Is that right?
Yes, pretty much. So that I mean, if it helps, it confused me for a little while because it looks like they've tried to model the existing scenario, just the baseline scenario, inclusive of vehicles, particularly on that diagonal road. And that's what we can see in their contour plot. But they don't. There's nothing in the noise assessment to show that they had got internal access flows put on.
So it's literally the buildings were dumped on top of the baseline, and then it was showing that scenario.
Yes, but it's actually worse because they didn't use the traffic flows to create the noise levels in this model. They actually just used the monitoring, and so it's there's quite a lot of other things in there that are. It's quite rudimentary, to be honest.
Okay, I understand. Any comments from you, Mr. Goodwin, on that?
Did have a couple. No, I know that. No, not on that. Sorry.
No, not on that. No, okay. On that. Anything from the Rule 6? No. Okay, thank you. Right, and then there's a question about the changes from the 14th of November to the 4th of December assessment. You set out in your rebuttal at 2.19 what that was. Any comments from the council? Sorry, the reason behind that. Any comments from the council about the changes?
One of the changes which hasn't been addressed by Mr. Mann is actually the change in the plan itself. There's buildings missing from the original one that appear in the new one. This is the Appendix E, and all of the graphics.
So the original, you're saying the 14th of November version?
Yeah, they seem to be missing the multi-story car parks.
Yes, so that was one of the things while we were working out how we were going to do that in the model. They're actually shown, they're actually sort of flat. So that's one of the changes that we made to make sure that we'd got that included.
Anything else to add from the council's perspective as to why it was changed? No. So that Mr. Mann says that the modelling presented in the 4th of December version is considered to be the most appropriate and recommended to me. Do you agree? Have you got any? Do you disagree or? The December version.
Yes.
Did I just say November? Sorry, I've even got December written here. That's not good. So the 4th of December version is the agreed. Okay, thank you. And just, I did have a question about the doubling of noise or the tenfold increase in noise that you've talked about. Mr. Mann, you talk about it in your rebuttal, and I think we've already discussed it. Was there anything else to add on that sort of context of doubling of noise that anybody wanted to discuss? No, I have nothing further on it. So
no, just that that's really a perception point. Yeah.
I think we've covered it, but I did have questions about the vehicle noise being averaged, and obviously we've now got the Appendix A of your rebuttal. Was there anything else to add on average vehicle noise?
Do have one point that refers back to the L maxes for the passing HGVs, and on the hourly detail, whether or not they are averaged into that hourly detail.
So I think we're talking about Appendix A of the rebuttal.
So you've got a question about passing HGVs,
Visual hourly detail in the last report.
and if they are averaged
If your
in.
HGV L maxes are averaged in,
So in the Appendix A of my rebuttal, we don't. We've got LAQ, and I haven't put maxes in to that table.
right?
So where we have the other table with the L maxes, that is a single event.
That's a single event. So
Yeah.
it's not averaged across.
No,
Like,
no.
just clarity. For,
yeah.
Can you just explain what the implications of that would be and what that
So
means to me, please?
passing vehicle would be 15 seconds, say.
Yeah.
50 decibels potentially, which is quite noisy. If you average it out across the hour, you're effectively decreasing the level of noise across the whole of that time period, which would then give you a much lower perceived level against a maximum noise event.
Your answer was that
It's just the passing event. So that short-term instantaneous passing is what we've assessed.
it's not, so it's not been put into the averages.
It's not been in the averages, and Appendix A doesn't include that element.
Then I did have one further point on the vehicle movements.
Hang on, just
Sorry.
sorry, my keyboard's not working. No, I think it might have died. It's doing bits and pieces, but it's not. Oh no, it's come back to life again now. Okay, right, sorry.
In regard to the table that gives the vehicle movements, so the vehicle movements, the access rate of 1,374.
Do you want to just take me to the which table?
Three proposals. Come down.
Table 3 of the Statement of Common Ground.
Page 5, yes. We've talked about existing vehicle movements already on the access road.
Yes.
The no development figure shows a 0. The access road.
Sorry, I'm struggling to find where that table's gone. There we go.
So it's the 4th road down, which is the southern access road to the southern car park. Without development, which I would take to be present, is 0, and then with the development, you've got 1,374.
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't equate against existing vehicle movements in that area.
Yes. So that was. This is comes back to this question about the purple, the missing data, where this data came from in the submitted ES. So we haven't replicated that.
Sorry, say that again for me.
So we're looking at table 3 of the Appendix E,
Common ground.
Statement of Common Grounds,
I'm there.
and we're looking at the flows that are actually in the no development scenario.
Yeah.
In particular, well, we've got see the western perimeter access road. The western perimeter is the sort of one that goes around the top corner next to the northern car park.
Yep.
Then we've got the access road to the academy in the southern back lot. That goes all the way
To plot
to the
5.
back lot.
Yep.
And then the southern access road is this, well, the one that we talked about before going down to the southern car park.
Yep.
So those have all got 0 flows on. But then I think the point you were making was about the diagonal one, is that?
Yeah,
So that's the 261.
that's 261.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just looking at the differences between those two numbers is quite significant in terms of vehicle movements.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers, these have been provided by Mr. Dix. So if there's any question about that, then that would need to go to him.
So you're just making the point that there's a
Yeah.
significant increase in vehicle numbers.
Yeah, which will have an impact on the.
Inspector, just on that point.
Yep.
It's really I think, in response to Mr. Mann's earlier comment that we must take into account the existing experience of vehicle movements on the access road that the local residents would perceive. Well, this table suggests that the differential will be more than 10 times in terms of the volume of vehicles using the access road. Am I correct in that?
So, sorry, where are you getting your numbers?
261 versus the 1382.
Yeah, yes, there will be an increase as the vehicle, as the vehicles are coming down to the car park. So, but in noise terms, certainly at that point there aren't receptors. So at that point, before as they're coming round along the diagonal road into the southern car park, they're not going past anybody on the diagonal road. But all of these numbers have been included in the modelling, and that's how we've got the numbers that we've got.
My point was simpler than that. Does the 261 represent the existing traffic associated with Park Homes and West Thorpe House?
Yes, as provided by Mr. Dix.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there a plan that we've already got open in terms of just looking at the layout or not? I don't think we do we?
You could use we can go back to figure 8 if you like, or one of those. Or do you want more detail?
It was just looking at where the access roads come in at, and then in terms of how that affects or. Thank you. That's helpful. So the southern access road, if we go to Appendix A of the Statement of Common Ground, the southern access road is up to the top of the studio hub. You can see sort of the circular half circle building.
Yes.
The southern access road is that there's like a crossroads and it's going to the east there down to the car park, or is there another one? Is it further down? Is it?
So
it's further down, isn't it? It's at the bottom.
It is. We've split it at the point where it comes off. So we've got the triangle. Sorry, I'm not that familiar with the plot numbers. So we've got the triangle in front of us, and then you can see that the access comes down to the south towards the back plot.
So it loops around the community building, and then goes to the car park.
So you've got one there. So there are 3 or 4 different internal access roads, but we've actually kept the same flows anyway on the one to the south, to the west, so that it's as fair as we can be. There isn't we don't have that granularity of data in the flows as to exactly which ones turn left and right at precisely within the site.
Up to the massive the biggest amount you can on the southern,
yes,
to establish a worst case scenario, essentially.
Exactly, and actually the point that was made earlier was that we've actually doubled it up in one case because we weren't exactly sure where they were going.
Right. Okay.
So it is worst case.
So I am right there, Anna, that it's this point. Yeah. Thanks. I know I'm only pointing to one side, but I think. No, it's that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's just for my clarity. Okay. Right. Wait. I think we've talked enough about near field noise sources and the differences between the changes in the background, and so I think that's fine. I think, yeah, we've answered that one. Sorry, I'm just running through where I'm up to. Any anticipated nighttime traffic movements then? Is that been accounted for in the documents? I know there's no HGVs at night anticipated from your proof at 4.09.
Yes, I think the easiest thing is to go back to our hourly tables that we were looking at earlier in
Appendix A.
Appendix A of the rebuttal. So there are we have put some movements in.
Yeah.
So where you can see, perhaps if we take receptor I is usually a good one. That's the nearest of the park homes to the corner. So if we look at receptor I, where we do predicted LAQ, and you can see that there is still some noise that we've got going into the evening there.
Yeah.
Obviously in the night, with that 17.2 is probably just a few vehicles, security or whatever. Again, these numbers have been provided by Mr. Dix.
Mr. Dix, yeah.
But it does show that there is some movement.
Okay.
It's very small.
Understood.
Just to say, madam, that if between now and Mr. Dix giving evidence, you want to ask him any of these questions, then obviously we can deal with that in evidence in chief with him.
No, understood.
Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Yeah, there's a bit of a crossover, isn't there? So, okay. Yeah, the council, you might have already answered this. You talk about a contextual assessment of impact, and that the approach taken doesn't provide this contextual. Is this what you're talking about, sort of the one-off events, the perception of noise being greater because the background might be lower, there's more movements and activity? Is that all, that's sort of what you're looking at, or what you were referring to in your statement?
Yeah, it is, and it's that the impact that has on the significance of the noise, and that it's closer to rather than far field.
Yeah. So is that something you'd normally expect to come in as an assessment, or is that something that you would require?
It's something that we would consider as part of the planning process, as we are consulted on in terms of the planning application.
And Mr. Mann, is that something that you come across frequently, or?
This is very unusual, to be honest. Looking at individual vehicle passing events, I've only ever assessed for specific deliveries to supermarkets, service yards that go through residential areas, in the middle of the night, where that is a specific consideration of that one vehicle movement. When it for a development like this, I would say it's unusual. Possibly a quarry, where you might have a early morning HGV going through, but it's not the norm. There's no SPD here as to how what elements of an noise assessment need to be included, and I would argue that it's additional information to respond to the points raised rather than something that would normally be submitted.
Anything further?
No.
Just to,
Mr. Fallon.
I think it is a very unusual situation where you have a shared access route. I think where effectively your the access to this extremely large development is sharing it with a very small, small scale access road to a small residential community. I think it's a very unusual situation.
Understood. Thank you. Anything further you want to add to that? No. Okay. And then my next question, I was going to ask about the appellant's conclusion on the fact that it wouldn't meet any of the noise levels defined as sole, and that you don't consider that the predicted noise environment would meet the policy test of significant adverse impacts. I don't think there's anything further that anybody needs to add in terms of that. I think you've all answered that question over the course of the morning. So my next question is just regarding the prefabricated structures at Westhorpe Park Homes and how that potentially affects the residents from future noise. Councillor Crabtree's talked about them being hot in summer, so windows are often open, and then the concerns that if you have to close those windows, there's potentially overheating health implications. I know that you've responded to that in your proof of evidence, but I'm just looking if there's anything else you want to add in terms of that, and then I'll go to the other side and then I'll come back to you for final comment.
Yes, so I see it quite simply. Yes, they are thin construction, shall we say, and I've looked at this before for park homes and canal boats in a similar situation. The weakest point, however, is the windows. The structure of the buildings will still provide at least 20 to 25 dB reduction. And so it's the windows that will always be the weakest point. And because we are looking at it with the windows open, so that worst case scenario, with the windows open and the levels being within the SOL set out, then that's how I assess that. In terms of ventilation, when those windows are closed, then there will also be additional reduction from the noise. So by looking at it in a worst case windows open scenario and that being acceptable, that covers both points in my opinion.
Understood. Thank you. Anything further to add, Councillor Crabtree? Mr. Goodburn? No. Mr. Fannon? Okay. Thanks. And that's all done on road noise. We're going to move on to backlot now. So what sort of noise is likely to be expected in the backlot? Are we talking crowds, explosions, vehicles blowing up? What sort of noise is it going to be?
Well, firstly, the backlot management plan does give us some good descriptions, but I would say the most important things that the words that are used in that backlot management plan are the words rare and occasional, because they when they talk about the noise events, this is not something that happens every night by any means, and the noise in particular is controllable, and that's how the backlot management plan looks at it, is agreed with the local authority, and I would say the most important thing in terms of the noise here is that in the rare event of nighttime operations, then the members of the public will be informed, and having dealt with many complaints over the years, that makes a big difference in terms of how the perception and how any noise is received. That being said, we have still modelled the noise, and we've got a list there of chainsaws and things that could be used, albeit that will be very rare and would be during the daytime anyway. So And the whole point, of course, with an outdoor film set is that you don't want a lot of noise. You're trying to get voices recorded. You're trying to get you're zooming in on what you're actually trying to record, because the rest is filled in on the green screen. So you don't actually want to, you want very directional noise, you want very much directional speakers, so that you can pick all of that out in that outside environment. And so we're not, they were, it's not supposed to be a noisy activity on purpose.
Understood. Thank you. Anything you want to add, Mr. Goodbun or Mr. Fannon? No. Anything from the Rule 6?
Yes, please. So the two things. One was the residential amenity impact of wildlife being scared away. So I think, referring back to what we talked about this morning, and some of the Westthorpe Park residents who have expressed the additional benefit they gain from the wildlife being close to them at the moment. I don't know if there's any recognition within the document that's been submitted of whether or not animals and birds will stay in the area if there are regular backlot filming going on. But also, whilst I take the point that in the backlot management plan, it describes how filming needs to be quiet. My personal experience, like I mentioned about the Star Wars set, is that the filming is actually a very small proportion of the time that the tradespeople are on set. So the construction of the sites and the taking down of the site at the end, that set going up and going down is quite a large proportion of the time that it's often there. So it needs to be quiet for the individual take, but the take will be a small part of the activity that occurs there over the course of a month or 2 months or however long it takes.
Understood. Thank you. You've got your hand up. Sorry, I don't know who you are or. Sorry, could you let me know who you are, please? Sorry. I'm just running a roundtable session for this public inquiry on noise at the minute, so I'm just looking to understand if you want to contribute towards the noise session or if you. Okay. Right. Large portion of time, deconstruction of noise. Yep. Anything?
Yes. So
not deconstruction of noise.
Of the
construction and deconstruction of the set.
Yes. So just wanted to qualify that my point about the filming is to do with the nighttime, because the nighttime is considered to be the most sensitive.
Yes, understood.
Elements. The construction, yes, that will occur, but that will be daytime, and that we have assessed that in the in all the modelling. So where we've seen that on plot figure 8.
Yeah.
So that gives us a good idea of where that is going to occur. Now, obviously, the problem with this, and this is why we have the backlot management plan, is that it's highly variable. So we've gone worst case, but it's about, really, this is about controls over the irregularity of it, and that's why it needs to be subject to these additional approvals and times of the day, and it's almost impossible to predict everything that could possibly go on, but it's about having the right controls.
Okay, so a lot of it comes down to the backlot management plan and that working effectively with
Yes.
residents. Okay, understood.
Sorry, just on the wildlife point.
Yes.
So I believe it's safe to take the levels that we've used in our modelling as typical levels that will be received at the wildlife receptors.
Yeah.
Simply because they are so worst case and they are so short term that our LAAQ, so the average noise level, is also what can be used for the particularly birds and other wildlife. And then I would refer you to our wildlife receptors in the table.
Yeah.
Which are, it's a very small contribution.
Understood. Thank you. Sorry, I've got quite a few questions, but I think most of them have just been answered. So, there's one point that Councillor Crabtree in her rebuttal picked up about any filming activity that does not comply with this plan would risk being immediately stopped by the studio to protect the amenity of residents, which is what you've quoted. And then the appellant does not address how such a decision to halt filming would be taken or the business implications that this would have on the studio. She talks about the ramifications of the impact on residents being significant if it wasn't shut down, because there's sort of that line that it would stop immediately. Have you got any comments on the rebuttal of Councillor Crabtree in terms of how she thinks that it may or may not operate?
So my understanding, and this may be something that, you know, gets as part of the planning condition to agree the backlot management plan, and then subsequently on each time that they want to operate outside of the standard production operating hours and production noise levels, that then has to be approved, that there is this 5-day period where they're proposing to run that past the local authority for approval. My understanding is that if the local authority don't approve it, then they won't be able to go ahead. Now, how that works from a management point of view, I can't comment on, but that's my understanding of how that would work. It's a bit similar to a Section 61 of the Control of Pollution Act, where for construction works, nighttime works, for a highway or something, if there's a flood and you need to or you need to fix the road or something, then you would apply to the local authority under Section 61, and then you would say, these are the controls that we're going to do, this is the noise levels that we're going to do, and because of it being a temporary short-term nature, the local authority can then assess that and whether or not the risk to the residents is acceptable and that all the controls have been used.
Okay. And there's, at that point, I'm guessing that the locals wouldn't be consulted because it's only 5 days, so you wouldn't have enough time to turn around a consultation with locals. So how do the council anticipate that working to ensure that the residents are informed?
Would largely depend on how the noise management backlot plan is set out in terms of neighbourhood engagement and how that's managed. There has been various commentary within the proofs and rebuttals in regard to neighbourhood engagement from the proposed development and how that looks and where that would sit within either an overarching noise management plan or the backlot management plan in terms of how that looks, and also how the engagement with local authority is also represented. And again, that would potentially form part of the backlot management plan and liaison appointed individuals within the local authority and or appointed individuals within the studio.
Okay.
But that would be quite a fine detail.
A typical way that this works is that there is a public liaison group that they would be given schedules. So you know, the 5-day notice period is the minimum, but that doesn't mean that it's that they won't know about some things months in advance, and they can get that process smoothed out. So certainly that could, I understand that, you know, anything, those sorts of additional controls and how that communication work could still be included in the backlot management plan.
Yes.
Sorry, just to add to that, if you go to part 12 of the draft section 106 agreement, paragraph 9.
Hang on, just give me 1 sec. Part 12 of the draft section 106.
Part 12, schedule 1.
Hang on, let me just grab it out of my emails because I've not moved it yet.
Yeah.
So it's the 106, not the unilateral.
It's the 106, yeah.
And I'm going to where, sorry?
You're going to schedule 1, part 12.
Have you got a page number that I can just jump to?
Yes, 32.
Thank you. Yep, I'm there.
And that paragraph 9 under part 12.
Mhm.
You'll see to employ a site and community liaison manager for the duration of the life of the development will manage and coordinate operations of film facilities in accordance with the terms and limitations of the planning permission and the approved backlot management plan. So the mechanisms identified there.
By the 106. Okay,
Okay.
understood. Have you seen that?
I have a draft section 106, but when I jumped to page 32 of the draft, this is the draft that you sent across, I didn't get to that part, so I just want to make sure I'm seeing the most up-to-date one.
One I'm referring to is the one that was sent on Friday.
I've got one dated the 24th, so that's Friday. It was page 32. You said
Page 32. Yeah.
and
Sorry,
that
actually, I might be reading.
I've got a page 32 starts with a paragraph 12.
Paragraph.
Yeah, I do actually, because I was just thinking, have I found where you were reading from? But I
Sorry,
thought I'll just run a word search afterwards and find it. So
Sorry, that might be my fault because I'm actually looking at a later version. But it's under part 12. It's paragraph 9 under part 12. That hasn't changed, that's for sure.
Okay,
Is that okay?
I found it now. Thank
Okay,
you.
sorry about that.
and it's
Right.
paragraph 9 under part 12. Yeah, I've got it. Okay. Any comments from Mrs. Cook?
Can I just clarify, because there were slightly two different terms there. There was the community liaison group, and then there was a community officer, essentially, which is referred to in 106. Now, I might be getting confused because of Pinewood's experience, but the community liaison group was actually run by Bucks, which had residents and Pinewood obviously attending. And Bucks had to fund that and unfortunately could not continue to fund that. So what I heard in the 106 is not funding for Bucks to be able to run that, but just a normal community officer.
You might not know the answer to that.
No, I might not, but my understanding is that it would be a forum for local authority and the operator and residents to get together and to share that. And it may not actually necessarily be meetings necessarily. It's sometimes just communication, telephone numbers. But I'm sure that we can discuss that with the right people.
Ma'am, I've got a question as well, just for Mr.
Yes.
Mann. It just goes back to something he mentioned earlier about the backlot management plan. And the note I have, what Mr. Mann said, is that as part of the planning condition to agree the backlot management plan.
Miss Nevin, I'm struggling just to hear you. I don't know whether it's the mic's not picking you up or it's not on.
I'll just move it closer. Is that
Thank you.
better? Might just be the way my head was turned as well. So I'm just looking back just to what Mr. Mann said about the backlot management plan. He talked about obviously the planning condition to agree that.
Yep.
And then Mr. Mann said that on each time they want to operate outside of standard hours, there's then a 5-day period where they are proposing to run that past the local authority for approval.
Mm-hmm.
And if the local authority doesn't approve, it can't go ahead. So I just want to get a greater understanding of what is meant by that approval. Is it anticipated that there will be a then more detailed sort of tailored backlot management plan that we put to the local authority for approval? It's just what exactly and what level of detail. And obviously from our perspective, it would be that something more detailed is required, and we would say that would be in the form of a detailed backlot management plan. So just a greater understanding of what you would be submitting for approval and what level of detail.
Yes, no, that's a fair point. So I'm again relating it to section 61 because that's a very similar process. And within that, there are usually details about hours. There has to be that because the standard hours are 7 till 7. So if you're outside of the standard hours, you must state which hours you're planning to use. There would be more detail on what's actually happening, what equipment is being used, and I would expect to have some predicted noise levels in there at the receptors. Now that would perhaps depend on exactly what's being proposed, because if it's a very small, we want to do half an hour when it gets dark, and it's only going to be a very, it's just a small amount of equipment, or whether it would still trigger that requirement to be approved by the local authority. But if it was something, like a very, half an hour, but they've just got to wait until sunset, then they may not need to have that amount of detail. So I think we should be purposely making sure that we're flexible on both sides. That's not to say that that's not, that level of detail would not be provided, but it's got to also be a sensible approach, I think.
Okay. I'm presuming the council's expectations about that backlot management plan in terms of having experience of other studios in the county, the area.
Yeah, in terms of the backlot management plan, our expectation would be it would be a generic plan for the normal day-to-day use of that backlot area. If there were, as Mr. Mann has been raised already, if there were things outside that, we would expect communication. Approval's probably not a good word, because as a rule, we try not to permit noisy activities, but we look at it on balance of what's being done and how it's being done, the frequency, duration, time of day and or night.
And that's that's sort of the 5-day notification period for anything that's sitting outside the generic backlot management plan that's going to come in.
We would have to make sure that it's workable within our scope of as well, because in theory you could notify us on a Friday of something you want to do on Wednesday.
I think it probably needs to refer to 5 working days, doesn't it?
That would be flashed out within the overall generic backlot management plan, but these individual specific elements would be quite closely scrutinised depending on what they were, degree of impact. That makes sense.
Yeah. Councillor Crabtree.
I think all of this has slightly missed the point I was trying to make in my submission originally, which is that I understand that there are similarities perhaps to the section 61 that Mr. Mann was referring to, but I'm talking about how this interacts with the so-called creative process of something like filming. If somebody submits a plan and it's given the nod by the council, and then when it comes down to it, they decide they need twice as many explosives because it's just not given the impact they were hoping for in their shot, who will be responsible on site for calling a halt to that type of filming? So if it's causing huge disruption to residents for one particular night, is there going to be somebody on site who has the capability to pull the plug on a filming production whilst it's in process? Because that's what the backlot management plan seems to suggest, and I just don't feel that that's particularly realistic given the business nature of what's going on.
I do agree. To a degree, might be able to answer that.
Yes, please.
Again, back to, and I can answer the Rule 6 party comment from earlier as well. Back to part 12, the purposes of employing the community liaison manager that's identified there for the duration of the life of the development. So that's an appointment throughout, or the replacement thereof, is to secure compliance with the terms, conditions, limitations of the backlot management plan, unless varied by written approval, and to then serve as the first point of contact and engagement with the council. So what's discharged by the approval of the backlot management plan that then set the terms, conditions, limitations and the requirements to be the single point of contact is the basis upon which that individual would perform that exact function.
Could I clarify though? I thought that was a part-time role, but that's not somebody that's going to be there whilst there's night filming occurring.
That was, I was just about to say they're not going to be there during filming on backlot, are they? I presume.
I can look at the definition. Quite happy to revisit the definition if that was required, but I'd have to remind myself. Hang on a second, if you don't mind. So do it the same. Sorry, trying to find the definition. 1 second. Bear with me a moment. No.
Maybe I can just help expand on this point just a little bit while we're looking for that.
Yeah.
I don't think there is a definition for the community liaison
Yeah.
manager. There's only community liaison group that I can see.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Another amendment to the 106.
That's another amendment to the 106. I'm quite happy to do that. I'm pretty sure it was in the earlier. Well, and
I
just
understand Councillor Crabtree's point. I
yes,
don't
right.
think well, we could maybe pick it up on Friday when we do the 106 session, but I get what you're saying, and I don't think there's anything that the appellant would add to that. I understand your point that you've raised.
Yeah. Sorry, just one other small point. There is a further reference to community liaison group to be set up at part 7 under paragraph 4. So in answer to the earlier question about the community liaison, you'll find it in part 7 of schedule 1.
Okay.
We picked up a glitch in the 106 and we'll deal with it.
Excellent. Mr. Mann.
I'll just come in with that, the point that I started with, it being rare, and that in the event of something extremely major, the rare event of something major happening, then there would, part of that agreement under the backlot management plan would and could include noise monitoring. It could include setting of levels, specifying what equipment can be used, what can't. So there is the capacity for all of those things to be included. Like I say, that's in that rare event that something major was going to happen. But
yeah, I think the point Councillor Crabtree's making, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, is when there's a creative process going on. Someone says we need a louder firework, and it just happens, and it's at that point there who picks up the issue basically, and who stops it. So I think I'm there on all that. Anything further to add on that point, Mr. Goodwin?
Yeah, sorry, it just goes to Mr. Mann's point about the potential for monitoring. That again, it's where that responsibility lies. Either is it with the local authority in terms of regulatory control, or is it within the scope of the production company that's doing the work? We've got set of parameters where we do our own things in terms of regulatory control, but if we're setting assigned levels, we would then be expecting the operator to ensure that their compliance is done.
I agree that that's a normal process.
Yeah. And operator to monitor and submit to the council any results. Yeah, that's my experience or my understanding of how those things work. So okay. Right. That covers everything I've got on backlot. Anything else anybody wants to add? No. Construction noise, I've just put it in because it's been raised by some interested parties. I understand the conditions that are being proposed that should address all construction noise issues that arise. Does anybody want to add anything further on that? No. Okay.
No.
That was just my point. Okay. Just giving people the opportunity. Lighting, you talk about lighting in your proof, which I know we're talking about noise, but there is lighting there. So we talked a little bit this morning about lighting for environmental reasons. But obviously the Rule 6 have raised concerns about lighting, and it's been mentioned quite a few times. Is the evidence that I've got, which I think is, now I could get this CD wrong, CD 1241, shows that there will be no significant adverse on amenity as a result of the scheme lighting. But I know the Rule 6 have continued to raise concerns. Is there any evidence or basis you've got for those concerns, or is it just purely that sort of from local knowledge of how it works at the minute and what you talked about this morning?
Yeah, I think it's mostly anecdotal photographs people have sent in, what we've seen at other film studios, that kind of stuff.
And anything to add to that?
No, just have a good look on your site visit. I think that would be helpful, and that the controls for lighting from the backlot management plan are very similar to what we've just discussed in noise, and so that would be wrapped up in the same communication and liaison.
Thank you. And then just a point of clarification for me. In 5.06 of your proof, Mr. Mann, you talk about there being 24 metres between the closest corner of the office workshop buildings. Well, you say the incubator space for new businesses, and then you say that there's no workshops or backlot or studios proposed in plot 2A. I think there is. So it's just looking to understand if that's correct. Because you said that the blank facade in terms of there wouldn't be any noise. I'll let you read that paragraph. That's probably easier.
Well, I'm thinking we might need to have a look at a detailed plan. I don't have one.
So it might be worth going to one in the DAS. Is there one in the or Mr. Bird? You look like you're grabbing.
It's here, but I need the design outside the frame.
So, the design presentation. Well, you probably didn't have your mic on.
CE1 231 is the DAS, or in the design presentation has the land use plan at page 54.
Page 54 of that.
The
design presentation. So Mr. Pryor's design presentation has the land use plan, which may be the easiest found.
Yep. So the building that I'm referring to in 5.06 of my proof is this pink and blue one, the film trade cluster workshop, film trade cluster offices.
Yeah, so that's I think it's building 6. Is it design office building 6? I don't think anyone's here who's done the design, but I think it's number 6, which shows ground floor, offices to the front, ground floor workshop, and then offices on top. But there are workshops there. So I just was looking to understand if that changes anything in your evidence.
No. So yeah, I've looked at a variety of different plans here. The point I'm trying to make here is that it's a blank facade, and even if it's a workshop with LEV, so local exhaust ventilation, we've included noise levels for plant and air handling equipment on the facade, but there won't be any breakout noise from that building. There are no windows, there are no doors, and what could be considered a yard building is actually part of the landscaping. So there isn't going to be activity external, is what is the point there. And I think I was trying to.
Can we just bring up the plan of that building that's nearest to Westthorpe Park Homes?
Yeah.
Then just so that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, essentially. So I think it's type 6, but I might be wrong, which is CD1 or 61.
Where are we going now? 61.
CD1061. I think that's the right. It is. Okay. So you said that there'll be no windows or doors on the southern facades, but there will be. I mean, I appreciate it's an office, but there's a reception and opening doors. So it's just making sure that it's been modelled on the plans that I've got before me, because your evidence indicates it doesn't tally with
It's
that
quite
plan I've
possible I
got.
was looking at a different plan. I'll just.
Is it CD 106? Sorry,
CD 1
one.
061,
Ah,
and that's the workshop. It's type number 6, but I think it's the only number 6 that there is on the site proposed. There's only one type 6 building, workshop office.
sorry, yes. Forgive me, I'm looking at the wrong one. CD 1
Councillor Crabtree, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think you're right that it is type 6 that's closest to Westthorpe Park, but
Yeah.
there's also, I think, type 2 workshops, which are the ones that are closest to Thimble Cottage. So there are 2 blocks of workshops, one of which is offices and a high level area.
Mhm.
And then there's also the
The
ones
2 that are on a 90
it's the other way, yeah. So I think it'd be interesting to look at those plans and see where the doors are to get into those, because I suspect they may be facing inwards.
and they're type 2.
It says they're type 2 on one of the plans somebody just mentioned. And then obviously the car park, which is immediately north of that, which is the one that I mentioned, has the walls which are full of holes.
Yeah, so they look like, that looks like, when you bring up type 2, I'm pretty sure that looks like the right one.
So just so that I can clarify then, so the car park's been modelled up, I've explained that. The way we've modelled the noise sources for this building is that LEV and plant noise are on the roof, but on the roof furthest away from the residents, as a typical location, and that there is no noise from the back, the back wall, if you like. That's how I've modelled it based on what information I was given.
So you've modelled it on there being blank facades.
Mm.
Okay. So does that affect, so the fact that they're not blank facades, does that affect your
There shouldn't
your
be
assessment?
no, there shouldn't be any. So external noise is always vastly more than breakout noise, especially from a small workshop like this. There would need to be normal controls to make sure that the doors weren't left open all the time. That's fairly standard, straightforward mitigation. In terms of it would be any LEV or plant noise, or you know, if there were forklift trucks or whatever going around, but they're not going to, because it's a landscape area. So so I would say that that's low risk. But if we needed additional controls, I'm sure that can be included.
Okay. Understood. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify it because it just didn't tally through with
Yes,
what
no,
I'd been on plan.
well spotted.
Thanks. Right. Okay. Anything else anybody wishes to raise on noise? No. Okay. Right. Oh, we're at 3 o'clock. It's like I'd planned that. We'll take a 20-minute break if that's all right with everybody, and then we will hear from Mrs. Cook. How long do you think you're going to be in examination in chief, Miss Nevin?
20 minutes,
20 minutes.
30 minutes max.
Okay.
My estimate's 20. Just if I could prevail upon perhaps Mr. Bird again.
Oh yes, swap seats. Yeah.
Thank you.
And we can move it back to, I'll move back and we'll go if Harvick and the council can help with.
And shall we put the witness table as it usually is, sort of beside me to my left then?
Yes, please. And then Mr. Fraser can cross-examine. You said an hour for cross-examination, Mr. Fraser. Are you still thinking an hour?
Yeah, I think I reduced that to half an hour.
You did, yeah. But I'm
Or
just checking.
That's very much the upper bound.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. We'll come back at 3:20 then, and we're adjourned until then. Well, can you hear me? Yep. Okay. Oh, we're not just at 20 past yet. 5 seconds to go, but we'll resume anyway. So the inquiry's resumed. Ms. Nevin, would you like to introduce your witness, and do you want me to pull up any core docs now or as you go through?
Yes, ma'am. The core documents I will refer to, there are only three, you'd be glad to know. It's Councillor Cook's proof, which is CD 13300.
Yeah, I've got that open.
Councillor Crabtree's proof, CD 13200. And the design and access statement, CD 1231. I think that's all I had. Before we start, we've just got a little bit of housekeeping on a new document, and I might just let Mr. Fraser introduce it. It comes from the appellant.
Thank you, Ms. Nevin, very much. At 2.2 of Ms. Cook's proof of evidence, Madam, you'll see that she refers to rat running through local streets. Mr. Dix, on behalf of the appellant, has prepared an aerial plan of Pinewood and the immediate surrounding roads to try and give you an indication of where we think that rat running is taking place. It's just for the purposes of some questions I've got from Mrs. Cook.
Okay.
I'll just hand it up.
Are you happy with that coming in?
Yes, ma'am, and Councillor Cook's had a chance to look at it as well.
Okay, thank you. You're happy with it? You've seen it? Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
And Mr. Bird says it's ID 80.
Thank you, Mr. Bird.
Diamonds.
Are we patting heads, rubbing tummies? Okay, right. Off you go, Ms. Nevin. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon, Councillor Cook. Can I just check if your microphone is on?
Now it is.
Perfect.
Do you want me to leave it on?
Please.
Yeah, and if you can be just a bit closer to your mic as well.
Yes,
Thank
no
you.
problem. Is that better?
That is helpful, thank you.
So I'll introduce you to the inquiry. You are Councillor Julie Cook and you've lived in Iverheath since 2014.
Correct.
Your home is about 0.9 miles from the entrance to Pinewood Studios?
Yes, by a road. No, by a road route, yes.
By a road route. And you've previously rented office space at Pinewood for 5 years? And you worked from there as well?
That's correct.
You are a member of the Iverheath Residents Association and a local parish ward councillor?
That's correct.
And you're here to provide evidence on the impacts of living in close proximity to a major film studio, given your experience of Pinewood, correct?
Correct.
So my first line of questions for you, Councillor Cook, is basically just to situate Pinewood for us. I know the inspector will be going around there soon, but just to get an idea now, how easy is it to get to Pinewood using public transport connections?
Right. So public transport would be, if we take via rail, there's obviously the Great Western Rail stroke Elizabeth line, and the closest station there is Langley. Then we have the Met line and Piccadilly line at Uxbridge, West Ruislip to access the Central line. This is a geography test, and the Gerrards Cross for the Chiltern line. Are all the types of areas that would go for rail public transport. For bus, there is a service that runs between Uxbridge and Slough. And whilst it's not public transport, Pinewood also offers a shuttle bus service to Gerrards Cross, West Ruislip and Uxbridge.
So we looked at public transport. What about people accessing the site then on foot or by bike? How easy is it to get to Pinewood that way?
Yeah, there's very limited bike usage because of the volume of traffic on the roads and the absence of any dedicated lines. The only dedicated wider walk/bike area is actually on Pinewood Road, and that was built by Pinewood as part of a 106 for their Pinewood East solution.
Are you familiar with the transport links around the Marlow Film Studio site?
I've only ever driven to Marlow, so the closest I understand is the train line, and I am unaware of any bus links.
But from your knowledge of the area, how accessible would you consider the Marlow site be? How accessible would you consider the Marlow Film Studios appeal site to be from public transport?
Oh, I think it would be significantly diminished. I just outlined 5 different rail lines that are in the near vicinity of, 6 actually, Great Western and Elizabeth Line, that allow you to get to Pinewood with relative ease.
And when you say diminished, do you mean, just so I've understood your evidence, in comparison to the Marlow site?
Yeah, I think Pinewood has better rail links than Marlow site.
Thank you. And from your knowledge, how many people, you don't have to obviously give an exact number, but how many people do you consider who work at Pinewood tend to live locally, roughly?
It's always a point of discussion. So first we have to work out who's working at Pinewood. Pinewood have an existing staff of 200 to 300. I've never had an exact number. So they are the staff that, if you like, are corporate staff. Then the majority of the people there are there for production purposes. So they're not employed by Pinewood and they're there for a short amount of time. To my personal knowledge, I know definitely of one person who is a permanent staff member of Pinewood who lives locally. I've been told that there is a second person, and I know of one person currently who is a contractor who did some work at Pinewood Ivor Heath, but has mostly now been working at Pinewood Shepparton. I have never got an exact number. We've asked this question and I can only go on my personal knowledge.
And what kind of worker then would tend to come to Pinewood on public transport?
Say that again, please.
What kind of worker would tend to come to Pinewood using public transport?
Once again, I have to rely on personal knowledge. In particular, when I was working there, and if I caught the shuttle bus for some reasons, the only persons that I could recognise were the people who worked in the catering team. And they
Very sorry to interrupt.
Sorry?
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I'm finding quite a lot of these questions are dealing with new points that aren't in Councillor Cook's evidence. Obviously I tolerate that to a degree, but obviously there's a lot of new material here. I'll just put down a marker about that.
No, I would say Councillor Cook does talk about the accessibility of the site in her evidence. She references things like rat running, which obviously speaks to the question of the local transport networks, the road networks. She talks about parking situations. So I would say this is very much within the scope of Councillor Cook's evidence, and we're not introducing new points because these are issues that clearly go to those points.
It's just obviously an examination in chief is meant to just pull out points from the evidence, not introduce new points. So just be careful where you're going and what you're questioning on, because Mr. Fraser will potentially want to do an adjournment and come back and it's not the good practice to introduce new evidence at this point. So
thank you, ma'am. That's noted. I'll just check what my next questions were. That's fine. My next question was just picking up a point raised in Councillor Crabtree's proof of evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And this is at page 74 of that. I'll give you a second to pull that up. PDF page 74.
Yeah.
And so this is where Councillor Crabtree refers to the Pinewood Travel Survey from 2022. And Councillor Crabtree says here that, referring to that survey, which we don't need to go to itself, it says that despite the best efforts of Pinewood to promote public transport and active travel, the percentage of employees commuting in single occupancy vehicles has never fallen below 80% of the period assessed. You're familiar with that evidence?
Yes, absolutely.
And so just based on what we've discussed, looking at Marlow and Pinewood, do you consider it likely or unlikely, Councillor, that Marlow Film Studios would experience similar difficulties to Pinewood in promoting public transport and active travel?
As I understand the business model of film studios, yes, I do, because it will be the same characteristics as a small number of permanent employees, and the vast majority of people on site will be freelance temporaries based on productions, and rather than people who are permanently based there.
Then just one final point then on the accessibility of the site. So just looking at the point of rat runs, and do you have in front of you the document that was introduced this afternoon?
Yeah.
And Mr. Fraser has kindly introduced it, but just so we can situate ourselves, there's the blue line. You see the blue line going through kind of mid to kind of slight left of the page. And do you see that's said to be, when we look at the key, the rat run using the sat-nav suggested route?
Yeah, so the blue lines are through Ivor Heath, clearly, and they are used frequently and obviously, and it's part of the continuing discussions with Pinewood. In addition, I showed two other areas. One is through Fulmer, and we know that that is an issue because in the Fulmer has asked for 106 in relation to the Pinewood South application, so section 106, to help manage the Pinewood-based traffic going through their village. And the other one is Seven Hills Road, which is subject to an application. It's also a section 106 from Pinewood South, and Pinewood have actually asked Buckinghamshire could they bring that on earlier, but Buckinghamshire was unable to agree with that, and that's because of the difficulties. In addition for that one, I am aware from the HGV officer in Buckinghamshire, there's signage up there saying go straight ahead, because HGVs were trying to take the inappropriate Seven Hills Road, and it becomes one lane and one parking, causing issues.
So just, you mentioned two extra areas, just so we're clear. When you said, or do you mean that those are two in addition to the rat running area identified in the blue line?
In addition to the blue, yeah.
And would you be able to just point, maybe perhaps if you hold up your
I'm not really great at maps, but it's Fulmer Road, which is kind of on the left-hand side of the red.
If you just maybe hold it up so that the inspector and my learned friend can see it as well.
Over this way, sorry. I can't read the road names, so it's really difficult for me to see. And so it goes through Fulmer Village. And then the other one is Seven Hills Road, which comes off the Denham roundabout and comes through. So actually, I think it would be this road here. Just looking at that. Yeah, I'm afraid the road names are just too small for me to see.
I think you mentioned Fulmer as well. Just where was that?
Fulmer Village is the adjacent village over here.
Okay, could you just maybe turn it around to the inspector?
Over here.
Yeah, I've just got Google Maps up.
That's easier.
Thank you.
So those are the areas where you say rat running occurs in addition to the blue line marked out on this page. Those are the areas where you say rat running occurs in addition to what the appellant has marked out on that blue line.
So yeah, they're the four areas that I was thinking of as people expressing rat running to me, and none of them are part of the official movement that Pinewood try to encourage people to take. But Pinewood have acknowledged the issues both through 106 activities for all of them, actually, or attempted 106 that haven't been implemented.
Thank you. So then moving on to questions of access to the site. At paragraph 2.4 of your proof, Councillor, you explain that Pinewood operates a controlled parking approach, and you talk about permits being used and issued for on-site parking. And in this paragraph, you set out your understanding that the number of parking permits is limited for each production and that there's a process of vehicle identification.
Yeah.
And then you go on to say that some short-term workers don't have permits. So could you just elaborate, please, on what you mean by short-term workers in that respect?
So obviously not the permanent Pinewood employees, the 200 or so people. These are people from the productions who are essentially renting the space, which is what happens. And they could be either on screen but part of crowd scenes, or they could be people that are carpentry and other type of trade type work to make the production. As far as I've been able to ascertain from when I worked there, they seem to be people who were only employed last minute or for a short period of time, and the effort of getting paperwork done was probably a bit much. But perhaps also more importantly, I am aware that as a tenant, when I was there, we were limited to 2 registered parking spots. Initially, we had no parking spots, even though we could have them, that there was insufficient. And then eventually we got allocated the 2. So we could have had any number of staff and we would still only get the 2 parking spots.
When you say as a tenant, we were limited to 2 parking spots, you just maybe clarify what you mean and who you mean by we.
We, my company.
Your company.
Thank you.
And so why then, councillor, do some people get permits and others don't, even if those other people are nonetheless expected on site?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Why is that the case?
Why? I think that would be a matter for the individuals, but generally there's just not enough parking spots. And there was so many people coming. In particular, I will never forget the crowd scene from Bond 25. I couldn't even park on site despite having a registered parking spot. There was just too many people. They had allowed them in and on the streets. We just couldn't get near it.
And at paragraph 2.4, I'm sticking with the same paragraph, you explain that the lack of permits then means that people choose to park in local streets.
Yeah.
And you say that residents have advised that they see people leaving their cars and then walking to the studio gates.
Yeah.
So how did you become aware of this pattern?
Yeah. It's as a local, but obviously as a local in the Residents Association in my councillor role, I talked to a lot of people. But there was also issues in the Pinewood Liaison group where the residents were saying, stop your people from parking in the streets because we've got nowhere to park and it's also causing traffic jams. And in many ways, Pinewood acknowledged this in their application for the multi-storey car park, which came after all of the other applications, which it actually says things like that the multi-storey car park will remove around 1,200 cars arriving from the studio via the main entrance and reduce existing parking pressures and traffic flows both at the studio and the surrounding network. So they acknowledge in that application that it was a case. During the Pinewood Liaison group, there was a little bit more pushback at the time, but eventually they've acknowledged.
And then you go on to mention at paragraph 2.7 of your proof that you've personally experienced being unable to park on site despite yourself having allocated parking. So could you please just explain how you ended up in that situation despite having your allocated parking?
So as I said, that was the Bond film No Time to Die. Eventually I was able to get into the site. There was a delay getting into the site. But eventually I was able to get in, presented at my parking spot with the label of the company name to find 2 cars parked there, back to back. There was no other parking available. And so I had to go home, basically. And it meant that I wasn't set up to work for home from what I was doing. I had my computers and everything that I needed in my office. So it caused a lot of effort. Disruption to my business, and whilst the crowd scenes are not frequent to that extent, it is still something that happens, and people do take your parking spots, and there's just insufficient number.
Was that an isolated incident for you?
To that extent, it was isolated, to the fact that if you got there to one of the unallocated spots and you got there after a certain time, if you like, when all the studios were on, I just can't recall, probably about 8 o'clock, there were no parking spots left anywhere in the studio.
8 o'clock in the morning?
Yes.
In the morning. Are you familiar, Councillor, with the design and access statement for the Marlow Film Studios?
Yes, I am.
And do you have this document to hand?
Yeah.
Could I ask you please to turn to page 124 of the design and access statement?
Yep.
And this is the page that deals with the site arrival and the gateways into the proposed studio. So similar to what you've just described from your experience with Pinewood, it also stipulates the need for vehicles to register before travelling to the studios and talks about processes of vehicle identification. And the last paragraph on that page of the design and access statement claims that this system of pre-registration will reduce queue waiting times for people arriving on site. And as I said, there's a similar situation and system at Pinewood, but from your experience of Pinewood, how successful has their pre-registration system been from preventing that queuing happening for people accessing the site?
I think we have to break that answer down into two particular elements. When I was a tenant and coming in and out every day, my vehicle was registered and I had provided proof of identity and I had a pass. I could go through on many occasions quite smoothly, provided there was no obstruction to the entry, and I can come back to that. However, if I had a visitor come, or if it was any other infrequent type of person like a delivery driver, they had to then register both their vehicle, and I could register the vehicle in advance, but their identity also had to be checked, and the number of people in the vehicle had to be checked. That meant immediately that they had to stop, because you couldn't really do that, all of those processes in advance. There was a physical check for them. So you had two different scenarios there about how smooth it was. So it would run smoothly if the only people that were coming in were people who came in every day and had gone through all those checks, and usually known to the security guards.
Mm-hmm.
If those situations were not met, or those criteria were not met, then there would be delay.
And how often in your experience would those criteria be not met?
Well, it's for everyone who doesn't come to site regularly.
Mm-hmm.
So because they have to go through the two steps, and then it would be a question if the regulars would get disrupted, because in particular HGV arrivals would block the road and you would just have to stop and wait for them to go through their registration process, but also their identity checks, and then the check that they were the only people in the vehicle.
At page 124, again sticking on the same page of the design and access statement, the third paragraph talks about once people make it into the site. So you've described obviously the situation of getting into that access point. But then in the Marlow case, once people make it into the site, it's envisaged then they will go to two separate car parks. And you refer in paragraph 2.7 of your proof to Pinewood making a further application for additional parking. You touched on this slightly earlier in your evidence, and that application being for further parking to cope with the further expansion of the site. And in your proof, you mentioned that those applications had already included provision for parking. So my question is, based on what you know about Pinewood, do you consider that Marlow Film Studios will be able to adequately predict and cater for the amount of people who will be bringing their cars onto site every day?
Pinewood certainly have not been able to predict. And that is evident by now the multi-storey car park being needed after all the other applications included car parking, and also just the peaks and troughs that come with different productions coming in, because they don't know in advance the size of a production. And so, no, I think it would be like hitting a very difficult target to say with 100% accuracy how many people will be coming to site and how they will be coming.
And the final point I wanted to take up with you is you talk in your proof about the impact of light and noise on studio residents, on rather local residents, paragraph 2.8. So would you like to elaborate on the impacts you say arise to local residents in the Pinewood area from light pollution? We've discussed noise more generally earlier today.
So on a general basis, Parish Council pays for the lighting in the area and the streets, and the lights are fairly well spaced, so it's not a high light area. Within the studio, it has to be well lit, so it's just immediately brighter than the surrounding areas. So that's a daily basis situation. Then in addition, you have if there's any outdoor activities. Now, for the last few years, there has not been a backlog, but that still doesn't stop the street areas needing additional lighting, and there'll be lights on a pole. There is comments through our local community groups. What's happening at Pinewood, there's lots of light, and we're seeing these spotlight type things happening. So that's in addition. It's fairly frequently that it's bright. Plus, we have bats in our area, and in all of the applications, we've had to have conditions around managing for the bats and to make sure that we have the flight paths available in low light, because the area does generate additional lighting over and above the parish lighting.
What are your concerns, or what would your concerns be for the residents living near Marlow Film Studios for light pollution if the appeal were to be granted?
I'm sorry, it's me again. I'm just not happy about this, madam, because there's nothing about lighting impacts in Councillor Cook's evidence, and moreover, we discussed lighting in both of the roundtable sessions that we've had today. So I'm sorry, but I do object to this
Paragraph 2.8.
2.8 does say
2.8.
noise and light.
But if we've had a roundtable session on noise that considered lighting as well, I don't understand why Councillor Cook's been given a second opportunity to deal with these issues. Sorry.
Well, the roundtable session was a noise roundtable session.
It was not even on there.
Would you like me to repeat that question, Councillor?
Thank you. Yes, please, because I got lost with the, yeah.
No problem. So my question was, what would your concerns be for the residents near Marlow Film Studios based on your experience with light pollution near Pinewood if the appeal were to be granted?
There's certainly going to be a lot more light than what they have now. And there will be times when there is intense light as well on the outside areas. That, you know, how that impacts is the individuals, is perhaps a matter for the individuals. And certainly you need to look at the light in terms of biodiversity, as we've seen in all of the pinewood applications.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no further questions.
Thank you.
It's that, yeah, it's on. This mic's a bit dodgy in terms of whether I know it's on or it's off. Mr. Fraser, would you like
Thank you,
to start
Madam.
your cross-examination? Are you happy to be cross-examined straight away? Do you need a minute? Are you okay? You're ready
Yeah,
to go?
yeah,
Okay.
as long as the mic's close, I'm good.
Any
Thank you.
co-docs that you want me to have open apart aside from the ones I've got open?
No, Madam. No.
Thank you.
Councillor Cook, can I just start with a couple of general questions?
Mm.
Firstly, impacts on residential amenity, whether they be noise, traffic, light, they are highly fact sensitive, aren't they?
They are highly, sorry.
Fact sensitive,
Yeah.
as in you can't make general claims about impacts without knowing specific details, can you?
I'm not sure that I agree or understand your question, so perhaps I'm not sure that I understand. My information is about what people are experiencing, including myself, in the Pinewood area. So I don't follow your question, I'm sorry.
That's not a problem. I'll ask it in a slightly different way. So as a general proposition, each development, wherever it is in the country, will have different impacts on the neighbouring residents, depending on a range of factors. Yes?
Yep, okay. I think there is some absolute principles to learn from one film studio to the next. They are
But,
work
Mrs. Cook,
sites,
can I
they are
interrupt?
industrial.
If you won't have been here when I opened, so it's much more helpful to me if you answer yes or no to the question
okay.
and then qualify it afterwards.
Okay.
It helps cross-examination flow a lot smoother. So please just answer the question that's been asked of you and then qualify it if you need to.
Certainly.
Thank you.
My answer would then, if you ask the question again, please.
It's as a general proposition, each development, wherever it is in the country, is going to have different impacts on neighbouring residents depending on a series of factors.
No.
Okay, so some of those factors that I can think of, and again, you may think of others, are the nature and the scale of the development, the location of the development, the location of the residents vis-a-vis the development, the access arrangements for the development, the overall road context around the site, and finally, the regulation of the development by the relevant planning permission or planning permissions, including conditions and Section 106. Do you accept that those are relevant factors, which will vary from site to site, development to development, that are going to influence what the impacts on residential amenity are in any given case?
Yes, I accept.
Thank
But
you.
if I may qualify,
Sure.
there is a commonality, as far as I can understand and have observed, between the operations of the film studios. And so we can learn from one studio to the next about those impacts.
Thank you. You say that you've read the design and access statement and you're familiar with that. Can I just understand how familiar you are with other documents that are before the inquiry? Are you familiar with the evidence that is relied upon by the appellant in this appeal?
No, I'm not. There is a lot of documents, so I have skim read what I thought would be relevant in terms of what I was talking about.
Okay, so I'm just asking, is obviously you're a witness for one of the main parties. Have you read the evidence of Mr. Ian Dix on highways, his proof and his rebuttal proof?
No, I have not.
Have you read the proof and rebuttal proof of Mr. Mann on noise impacts?
No, sorry, I can't recall.
Have you read the proof of evidence of Mr. Smith, which deals with landscape and visual impacts, but also impacts on residential amenity?
No, I haven't.
And have you read the proof of evidence of Mr. Stephen Sensical, the appellant's planning witness?
Sorry, which one?
Mr. Stephen Sensical, the planning witness on behalf of the appellant?
No, I haven't.
Okay. And the point I want to just put to you really quite simply is that on what basis are you able to give any relevant evidence to this inquiry without having read the evidence that is relied upon by the appellant?
From my experience.
Ah, okay. Thank you. And when you make a judgment, I think for the first time in oral evidence with my learned friend Ms Nevin just now, that the public transport accessibility of Marlow Film Studios will be significantly diminished compared to Pinewood, without having read any of the evidence that's relied upon by the appellant, what qualifies you to make that comparative judgment?
As a resident of the area and as someone who has worked on the site, I have observed the number of people, the types of employment, and I understand from reading about the industry that is a typical pattern, an atypical workforce. And I have not seen anything in Marlow's application to suggest you were using a different business model and therefore would have a different workforce constitution.
But Councillor Cook, you say you've not seen anything in Marlow's application. That may be because you haven't read the appellant's evidence.
The last part you just said?
The fact that you may not have seen in the appellant's case any information to suggest anything otherwise, that might be because you haven't read the appellant's evidence. Have you considered that?
I have not read it in detail. I have skim read.
Forgive me, but I've recorded your answer as being that you haven't read the information. Yes, you haven't read it in detail.
For me, read means read in detail.
Right. So just to take an example, you've made some comments about public transport accessibility. Are you familiar with what the appellant is seeking to provide in terms of new bus services to the site?
I understood that they were providing a shuttle bus type service for people who were working at the site to the relevant stations, which will be High Wycombe.
And that's obviously relevant to the question of public transport accessibility, but it wasn't mentioned in your evidence in chief, or indeed in your evidence anywhere. But it's plainly relevant to the question of comparative access, isn't it, between Pinewood and Marlow? Do you agree?
No, I actually don't.
So the provision of bus services is not relevant to public transport accessibility for Marlow?
Because, so no, I do not agree, because I have already stated that the constitution of the workforce will be similar given the nature of it, and they tend not to catch the bus.
In your evidence, your written evidence at paragraph 1.2, you talk about how Pinewood has grown incrementally, and you refer to the fact that since 2010 there have been 24 planning applications, not including minor amendments and so on. And I think you describe at paragraph 1.2 that the site constantly evolving. Do you agree that it is a contrast between Pinewood and Marlow, that the scheme is being put forward as a single planning application in this case?
No, I do not. My point is that the film industry is constantly evolving, and whilst each of the Pinewood applications in themselves were single applications, then as time moved on, there was a need for an evolution. I would, so no, I do not agree that we can just say what is before the planning officer today is the end of the story for Marlow.
But there's one application or appeal that's before the inspector, isn't there?
And in each of Pinewood's case, there was one application.
And are you asking the inspector to consider potential future expansions of Marlow, or are you asking her to look at this specific appeal?
I am noting that things change.
In your evidence, both orally and in writing, you talk about HGVs travelling past local residents and rat running. You've given evidence on rat running. The practices of private hire cars, parking on local streets, queues getting into the site along the local residential roads. And you've also seen this plan at ID 80, which we've put together, which hopefully accurately demonstrates one of the rat running routes, and you've very helpfully indicated there are other rat running routes as well. It's a significant difference, isn't it, between the appeal site and Pinewood, that the appeal site would benefit from direct access off the strategic road network without needing to travel through residential areas. That's a significant difference, isn't it?
Yes, on paper, there presents in the Marlow a much cleaner access to the beginning of the site and to the motorway than in our situation in Overheath.
Okay, well, you qualified your answer by saying on paper. Do you say that there's going to be some difference in practice?
I never cease to be amazed at the way people manage to find to get to places.
Okay. In relation to parking, have you seen the provisions in the section 106 in draft on parking and Mr. Dix's evidence at section 10 of his proof of evidence on parking?
Say that last part again.
Mr. Dix, the highway witness for the appellant, deals with this in section 10 of his proof of evidence. Have you read that?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So again, what's the inspector supposed to do with your evidence about parking when I'm afraid you haven't read any of the relevant material relied upon by the appellant on this issue?
Yep. I am bringing my evidence as as experience from what Pine would have discovered.
There is, in fact, a very significant advantage to the appeal scheme compared to Pinewood, given this direct access off the strategic road network. And that's not just an on-paper advantage, that will be an advantage in the implementation of the scheme, won't it? For local residents.
I would certainly hope that there is that advantage.
Do you have any evidence to suggest that won't happen?
You can't provide evidence of the future.
Okay, well, let me ask you, I'm assuming familiar with the site. Have you been to the appeal site?
Say that again, sorry. You need to be just a little bit closer to the mic for me.
Sorry, have you been to the appeal site?
Yeah, I need you to be a little bit closer to the mic, please.
Have you been to the appeal site?
Yes, I have.
And so are you aware of the general orientation of roads?
Yes, I have not been in on the field, but I have been driving past.
Okay. What possible rat running opportunities would there be which are going to affect local residents?
That's why I say on paper there is not any, but I am never rule out any possibilities.
Okay.
Because there is an underlying assumption that people are going to come up from the 404 rather than come through Marlow Town, for example, or come back up from the Riverway from Maidenhead area.
Okay. Last question then. Your evidence may well be relevant evidence in the assessment of the implications of Pinewood for local residents in the area, and I don't seek to question that at all. But it is, with respect, not relevant to the determination of this appeal, is it?
That's not a question, that's a statement.
I said, is it, at the end? Do you agree with the submission I've put to you?
No, I do not.
I've got no further questions. Thank you very much.
Am I on? Yeah, I'm on. I have no particular questions. I understand your experience is based on Pinewood, and that's what you've come to do and give evidence on. I understand the appellant's points. I don't think I've got anything else to raise. Is there any interested parties in support that want to ask questions of Mrs. Councillor Cook? I wasn't sure. I didn't know you. Did you want a councillor or Mrs. Cook?
Say that again.
Did you want councillor or Mrs. Cook? Mrs. Cook. Any interested parties in support that want to ask questions? No. Okay. Any questions for you in re-examination? No. Okay. Then that concludes your evidence. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Anything anybody else used to raise before I adjourn for the day? Mr. Bird. Oh,
just the site visit, happily no spillages. Yes, just the site visit on Monday in terms of film studio visits. There's been a flipping of the order. It would be 11 o'clock at Shinfield and then 2:30 at Pinewood in the afternoon. There is a requirement in relation to Pinewood for the signing of a non-disclosure agreement for all those visiting. We have a copy, madam, and we've supplied it to the appellants. And we'll supply you with a copy as well if you're happy to, well, obviously read it. Make sure you're happy with the content of it before signing.
I shall do so. Okay, no problem. So 11 o'clock Monday, not 9:30. 11 o'clock at Shinfield.
Shinfield, madam, but I think it's about an hour, less than an hour from here, but 45 minutes.
What time do we want to meet here?
Yes, if we said 10, that should be ample time. Mr. Fannin will be coming from the council.
Who from the appellants, Mr. Sensical, or
Sorry,
who will be coming for you?
Mr. Laycock.
Mr. Laycock. Rule 6.
Mr. Kershaw.
Mr. Kershaw. Okay. That's fine. Anything else to raise for the?
Just one point,
Yeah.
Madam. You asked a question about groundwater yesterday.
I did, yes.
Mr. Sensical has been looking into this. The answer to your question, who's responsible for it, is the lead local flood authority, which is Bucks Council.
Yep.
And the relevant parts of the committee report to look at on this issue of groundwater are paragraph 18.19 and 18.25. And then it's also picked up in condition 23 on surface water drainage.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else to raise before the end of the day? Nope. Right. So we will adjourn. We are due in tomorrow at what time are we due in at? I'm just grabbing my programme now. 9:30. Is that still okay with everybody? Bit of an earlier start. We were trying to get through Mr. Fannin and Mr. Kershaw, or did we want to do a 10 o'clock start? Because I know we're not doing economic benefits for Mr. Fannin now. So any thoughts?
Fairly easy, Madam Mr.
You're easy.
Yes.
I think 10 o'clock will be fine, Mum.
10's fine. Yep. Okay, we'll start at 10 then. So we're adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.